let's talk about running published adventures. Hi, I'm Jared. This is In Character Games. For the past 7 years, I've written for the TTRPG industry for companies like Chaosium, Modiphius, Cubicle 7, and more. And the majority of the things that I've written for those companies have been adventures. Along the way, as I was writing adventures that got published and included in anthology books and things of that nature, I realized something. The way that I was running published material was shifting the more that I wrote. And the more that process of writing and running those adventures for test games and for cons, I really started to pick up several tips and tricks that I want to share with you today about how you can run published adventures like a game designer. It really all boils down to 3 tips. Step 1 is preparation. Now, there is this theory that I see all the time where people are like, I don't have time to write a campaign, to write adventures, so I'm going to go buy a published campaign or a published adventure, and that's what I'm going to run for my group. And true that buying something that is published is going to save you the time of figuring out challenge ratings and combat balance and coming up with NPCs and coming up with a plot, coming up with how the story beats hit and all of that. You're absolutely going to be saved that preparation time, but you need to replace it with a different kind of preparation because you didn't write this material and you don't know it. So excise from your brain this idea of, oh, well, a published adventure is going to free me up from having to prepare. It is going to lessen your amount of preparation that you need, but it's not going to remove it altogether. So the next thing I hear is, well, I don't know what I need to prepare. I don't know, should I just read the book from cover to cover? Yeah, you can do that. You can go buy Curse of Strahd and read the book from cover to cover, but you're reading a book, not preparing an adventure at that point. You really have to target what you're reading and target how you're reading it to better prepare you to run that adventure later. So to make this simpler, I'll divide it into a series of prioritized tasks. If you start with the top of this list and go through to most near the bottom, you'll be pretty well prepared. If you get only a couple notches into this list, it's going to be a lot harder for you to run a good game. The top of the list is the adventure overview. The adventure overview is the author's way of telling you how they predict the adventure is going to go. It is often wrong. Your players are not going to do the things that the adventure overview tells you to expect. But by providing that overview, the writer is giving you the bold beats, the high points of what the expectation of the adventure is. If it's a well-written one, it's also going to tell you things about the tone and the feeling of the adventure. That may just come across in the words that are used, or it may be more explicit, like this adventure is supposed to be scary, right? If the only thing you have time to read is the overview or summary of the adventure, you're not prepared enough to run the adventure. You need to get down a couple more notches in this list before you're ready. The next most high priority thing to read is going to be the adventure background. The background is going to give you everything that happened before that matters to the adventure. And by marrying the background with the overview, you have a clear picture of what has come before and how it is impacting what is going on now. And the two together are going to really give you a solid basis for understanding the entire rest of the adventure. Okay, so you've read the background, you've read the overview, you understand them both. Are you ready to run the adventure? Of course not. You're not there yet. You're just not. Like, if you were forced to run it at this point, you could do it, but you're going to be doing a lot of flipping in the book. Your players are going to be doing a lot of flipping through their phones because there's going to be a lot of dead time and downtime. I wouldn't recommend starting yet. The next thing on that priority list of tasks that you need to prepare before you start running the adventure is the hook. Some adventures are going to give you more than one hook. Some adventures are only going to give you one. Either way, you need to read through the hooks provided, pick one, and tie it in to the adventurers, to the characters that your players are playing, and really kind of understand how you're going to get your players into this scenario, into this campaign or this adventure. I'll talk a little bit more about tying things in step 3 later. But for now, just review the hook and understand how you're going to get your players into this adventure that you now know through the background and the summary what's going on. The third thing in this priority list of what you should prepare is going to be a little bit different than the other ones, where the other ones were like, okay, go read this and understand it. I want you to review and understand the maps. The maps are so crucial to orient yourself into the adventure, to really understand where things happen. If there are maps, not all adventures have them, but if there are maps, understanding those maps and orienting yourself within those maps is a key part of understanding the adventure. You start to understand the flow, you start to understand where things are happening. It's just so crucial. So now that you understand where things are happening and oriented yourself in space, you know how the players are going to get there through the hooks, you know what has happened before, you know where the adventure is going, you are at what I would call kind of the bare minimum of preparation you need to start running the adventure. It's not going to be a great time. It is going to be difficult. You are going to have to wing it a lot, but you at least have enough under your belt at this point that you could do it. I suggest you go further down the priority list though. Next in the priority list is going to be bold beats, set pieces, and those really big, important NPCs. So set piece encounters or bold beat encounters are going to be those encounters that really impact the story the most. They're going to be the fight against the big bad evil. They're going to be when you face off against their henchmen midway through a campaign, or when a certain NPC is supposed to be kidnapped or die, or some emotional big dramatic turning point happens in the adventure. By reviewing those set piece encounters, and they usually happen towards the end of a chapter if there are multiple chapters in the adventure or campaign, by identifying those set pieces and reading those, you really start to get an understanding of the flow. The overview might even call out specific areas in the adventure, and anything that's mentioned in the overview is probably a set piece that you can find later. Okay, you've done set pieces, you've oriented yourself in the world with the maps, you've reviewed the hooks and picked one that you're going to use, you've reviewed the background, you've reviewed the overview. Are you ready? You might be. You just might be. But if you've got a little bit more time, just a little, there's one more thing that I would say you should do. And that is to go to the very entry chapters of the book, the first encounters, and to start reading through encounter by encounter. This is really the meat and potatoes of preparing for running the adventure. You've now laid the foundation by doing all of the other prep things that we talked about, and now you're really looking at what's going to happen in session 1. So how does the list of prioritized tasks to prepare have anything to do with being a game designer? Well, for the most part, that list is the exact same list I use to write an adventure. I'm going to start with an adventure outline, which looks a lot like an overview. I'm going to go in and then write some background material to know how I have gotten to that adventure outline, that overview. I'm then going to probably sketch some maps and understand spatially where I want to start putting things. I'm going to write hooks for the players to get involved. I'm going to start writing set piece encounters and placing them in the right places throughout the adventure and leaving placeholder to be written later markers for the encounters in between. And then once I have that overview, that background, the hooks, the sketch, and all those set pieces, then I can start to fill in the rest of the adventure. So you can see the mirror between what I've told you to prepare and how adventures are actually written. Step 2 for running a published adventure like a game designer is to own it. Look, you didn't write the material. You do not have an emotional connection to the material. If you're running something that you wrote for your home game, you have an emotional connection to that material. You came up with the plot. You came up with the NPCs. You came up with the encounters. So you have a direct connection to the material. When you're running something that I wrote, you don't have that connection. That missing link to the material is going to be felt if you don't amp things up and own it. You really have to take all of your game mastering skills, turn them up to 11, and really own the material so that your players don't sense that lack of connection. You want to make it seem like this is something you wrote, that your heart and soul are in this. I mean, let's face it, your players have asked you to run a game for them, right? And so they're expecting the best game that they can get every single session. And if you come in with a book that you bought off the shelf and are just phoning it in because you didn't have time to prepare and you didn't have anything that you wanted to run, if you've run a published adventure or campaign before, then you actually have started to develop that emotional connection. The memories from running it the first time, the highs and the lows from that series of game sessions are going to give you a more intimate connection with the material. And that is going to up your game. So don't be afraid to run something for different groups, obviously, more than once. You actually are building on and practicing that material. And so if you have a good time running it for group A and group B needs something to play and you want a game master, don't be afraid to grab that adventure that you've already run or that campaign that you've already run and run it again. You've done it once, you know the ins and outs. You now have that emotional connection and it'll be easier for you to own it and it'll be easier for you to really have a great game. Step 3 to running a published adventure like a game designer is to tie it in. Tying it in is so crucial. If you take an entire adventure and just drop it into the middle of a campaign, don't tie it in at all, it is going to feel like a foreign object, because it is. You didn't write it, your adventure is not, your previous adventures are not connected to it, it's not connected to your campaign world, it's not connected to your player characters, it's a foreign object just dropped into your campaign. Instead, take the hook and modify it. Make it your own. Take out NPCs and put in NPCs from previous adventures. Look at your characters' backgrounds, or if you're running 5th edition D&D, your character's origins, and really figure out ways that you can tie them into the adventure. If the last campaign was all around the town blacksmith doing something with or for the characters, then maybe he's the one that's going to hire them to do the next thing instead of the town's mayor that is written into the adventure. Take those NPCs from previous adventures, put them into the campaign, put them into the published adventure that you're running, and your players will instantly connect with them. Tie in their backgrounds. If a player is a sailor, how does that impact the adventure? How does that impact the hook? How is that going to impact the encounters that you run? If they're a merchant or a criminal, how is that impacting how the adventure is going to run, how the adventure is going to flow? What's the impact going to be on set pieces, on NPCs that they meet? Use your player characters' histories and backgrounds, use previous adventure material, NPCs, whatever you can. The more things you can string into and tie into the new adventure or campaign, the more that your players are going to be engaged. When you're tying it in, there's an extra bonus piece that you can consider, and that is reskinning. Reskinning is the act of taking something that already exists and changing it wholesale, putting a new skin on it, and coming out with something that feels completely different. For example, what if you took Curse of Strahd and set it in a desert realm instead of Barovia? And instead of Count Strahd being the evil villain, the villain is a long dead mummy of a pharaoh. Suddenly, the whole adventure changes. You can use every single encounter that is already there. You're going to have to update them to have a more desert feel than the feeling of encounters in Barovia, but by reskinning it, you've completely changed it. And this is going to tie right back into step 2 of owning it. Once you go through that process of reskinning it, now you have that emotional connection. You've tied this thing in and you've reskinned it to make it your own. And that new emotional connection to this reskinned version of that material is going to help you to own it and be a better game master for the material. Another example, say you're running Order of the Stone. It's an adventure series that I wrote for Call of Cthulhu. It takes place in the 1920s. The first adventure takes place on a steamship crossing the Atlantic. Well, what if you were to set that in space instead? Same exact adventure could be run as a space adventure on a space liner, and instead of running for the life pods, you're running for the escape pods. All right, so you've gone through those 3 steps. You've prepared, you're ready to own it, you've tied it in. You're now ready to run a published module or adventure like a game designer. Now look, I know none of the things that I have said here are revolutionary. If you have game mastered for years, you probably know half of what I've already said. I may have phrased it in a way that made you go, oh yeah, that's what I've been doing all these years. Or I may just be repeating exactly the stuff that you've been doing. What I'm trying to do here is not to show you some mystical new knowledge that only I know, but to share with you how I, as a game designer, run this sort of material. And hopefully you see through that how you've been running published adventures all along is how a game designer would do it. Or if not, you've picked up a couple of tips or tricks or had a few aha moments along the way that made you go, oh, I could add that tool to my toolbox and I'd be a better game master, especially when running published adventures. Look, if you've enjoyed any of this, I'd love to have your support on the channel. You know what to do down below. And if you're interested in the indie TTRPG that we're working on here at In Character Games, we'll drop links down below where you can sign up for our newsletter to get information about our upcoming products. Thanks. I'll see you next time.